In the autumn of 1944, the war in Europe entered a decisive stage. After the successful Normandy campaign in June and the breakout from Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches, the Allies had liberated most of France. By September, Paris was free, and American, British, and Canadian forces were closing in on Germany's borders. It seemed the war was nearly over. Many in Washington and London believed that within just a few more months, Hitler would be forced to surrender. Yet that picture masked the real difficulties facing the Allies. After racing across France at lightning speed, American and British forces encountered serious logistical problems. Supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers, while the vital deep-water port of Antwerp remained unusable because the Germans still held the Scheldt estuary. The Red Ball Express truck convoys ran day and night, but still could not deliver enough fuel and ammunition for millions of soldiers and thousands of tanks. As a result, Montgomery's Market Garden offensive in September failed, and the Allies could not break through German defenses in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, though Germany had suffered repeated defeats, it had not collapsed. Hitler refused to admit defeat. He believed there was still a chance to turn the tide with a sudden counterstrike. On the map, he focused on the Ardennes, a forested mountainous region spanning Belgium and Luxembourg. It was here in 1940 that German forces had unexpectedly pierced the French defenses, leading to the Dunkirk disaster. In 1944, Hitler was convinced the Ardennes remained a secret doorway that could reverse his fortunes. Hitler's plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, was one of the most reckless gambles in military history. He ordered the concentration of over 400,000 troops, 2,400 tanks and assault guns, and more than 2,600 artillery pieces for a surprise thrust through the Ardennes. The ultimate goal: smash through the thin American lines, cross the Meuse River, and seize Antwerp. If Antwerp fell, the Allied armies in northern Europe would be cut off from their supplies, forcing Britain and the United States to negotiate. In reality, many German generals had little faith in the plan. They knew Germany's manpower and fuel reserves were already exhausted. 1/3 of the troops were raw recruits or Volkssturm militia. The Luftwaffe was nearly paralyzed in the face of Allied air supremacy. Some commanders argued for only a limited counterattack to slow the Allies rather than a grand strategic gamble, but Hitler ignored them all. With blind conviction, he believed that creating a rift within the Allied ranks could still change the outcome. One factor in Hitler's favor was Allied complacency. American commanders believed the Ardennes was a safe, quiet sector, given its rugged forests, poor roads, and the harsh winter. The line there was held mostly by weary units rotated back for rest and reorganization. Barely 80,000 U.S. troops stretched across a front nearly 130 kilometers long. Many were inexperienced soldiers who had never faced combat. This lax defense made the Ardennes the perfect target for Germany's counteroffensive. On December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Offensive began. Thousands of German guns opened fire in thick fog, shattering American positions. Immediately afterward, armored divisions with Tiger IIs, Panthers, and Panzer IVs surged out of the forests in ferocious attacks. The Americans were completely caught off guard, many units were overrun, and thousands of soldiers captured. In the first days, German forces advanced more than 80 kilometers into Belgium, creating a massive bulge on the map. Hence the name Battle of the Bulge. However, despite these early gains, the offensive soon ran into serious obstacles. The Ardennes' narrow, winding roads caused traffic jams of German armor. More critically, fuel shortages crippled the offensive. The Wehrmacht lacked the gasoline to sustain a prolonged campaign, relying instead on capturing Allied fuel depots. Many Tiger IIs, powerful but fuel-hungry, had to be abandoned when their tanks ran dry. Within this struggle, the town of Bastogne emerged as a strategic focal point. It was a vital road junction where 7 highways radiated across the Ardennes. If the Germans seized Bastogne, they could expand their breakthrough. reach the Meuse, and threaten Antwerp. Conversely, if the Americans held it, the German advance would be bottled up in the forests, unable to maneuver or resupply. Both sides understood that Bastogne was the very heart of the battle. When the Germans began their thrust through the Ardennes on December 16, 1944, the Allied High Command quickly realized that the main thrust was aimed at the vital road network leading to the Meuse River. Among these, Bastogne, a small town in southern Belgium, emerged as the key objective. Bastogne was not a large city, but its position was uniquely important. From it, 7 major roads radiated in all directions: east into Luxembourg, west to Namur, north to Liège, and south toward Arlon. In a war of maneuver, whoever controlled Bastogne controlled an entire strategic transport network. The Germans understood that without capturing Bastogne, they could not accelerate their advance to cross the Meuse. The Americans understood just as clearly that if Bastogne fell, the entire Ardennes front would be torn apart. By December 18th, as the situation on the front grew increasingly dire, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, made a decision of life-or-death importance. Bastogne must be held at all costs. He tasked General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group with dispatching forces to secure the town. At that moment, the only units able to respond quickly were the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions, resting near Reims, France, after grueling campaigns in Normandy and Holland. Among these, the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, was chosen as the core force to hold Bastogne. Within 24 hours, paratroopers were rushed more than 160 kilometers by truck through a freezing winter night and into the town. Alongside them came armored elements from Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, plus scattered artillery, engineers, and support units. By the time the encirclement closed, about 18,000 American soldiers were inside Bastogne. On December 20th, the siege of Bastogne tightened. German forces, including armored divisions from General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Army and the SS 6th Panzer Army, closed in. Massive Tiger IIs, along with Panthers and Panzer IVs, encircled the town from every direction. Bastogne became an island in a sea of German troops. Conditions inside quickly grew desperate. Temperatures plunged below 20 degrees C, and snow blanketed the landscape. The Americans lacked winter clothing, ammunition, and medical supplies. Field hospitals overflowed. Wounded men lay outside in the cold, many freezing to death without blankets. Food rations dwindled to starvation levels. Each day brought relentless German air raids and artillery bombardments, yet American morale held firm. They were commanded by General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st in place of General Maxwell Taylor, who was in Washington. McAuliffe, known as a calm and optimistic officer, inspired his men with a simple but powerful order: hold Bastogne. Despite being surrounded, the Americans organized a remarkably effective defense. Units were deployed in a circular perimeter, creating a 360-degree line around the town. Artillery was positioned to deliver interlocking fire, ready to strike any German advance. The paratroopers, accustomed to mobile warfare, turned every house and forest edge into a fortress. Each German assault was beaten back by a combination of heavy firepower and unyielding resistance. Meanwhile, at the highest levels of command, Eisenhower and Bradley understood that if Bastogne fell, the entire Ardennes campaign would tilt in Germany's favor. They quickly ordered General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army to the south, to pivot his forces and march to the rescue. But whether Patton could arrive in time was uncertain. Blizzards and the rough terrain made movement excruciatingly difficult. Until then, Bastogne's fate rested solely on the iron will of the 18,000 besieged Americans. The tension mounted. German forces launched repeated assaults, but failed to break through. By December 22nd, with the encirclement complete, The German commander sent an ultimatum demanding surrender. The note warned that if the Americans did not lay down their arms, the town would be completely destroyed. General McAuliffe's reply would become one of the most famous in all of World War II, nuts. A single word, humorous, defiant, and unshakable, captured the spirit of Bastogne. From that moment, Bastogne was no longer just a small town in the Ardennes. It became a symbol. Each passing day, the Americans were not only fighting to hold ground and roads, they were fighting to prove to the world the meaning of their resolve: never surrender. On December 22, 1944, Bastogne was completely encircled by German forces. All the vital roads linking the town to the outside world had fallen into Wehrmacht hands. The harsh winter weather continued to blanket the Ardennes in heavy snow, grounding Allied aircraft and preventing supply drops or air support. Inside Bastogne, the situation grew increasingly desperate. The wounded overflowed into churches and warehouses, many dying from blood loss or freezing to death. Ammunition stocks dwindled so badly that 105mm and 155mm guns fired only sparingly. Rations were cut to half, even a quarter, of normal. Amid these dire conditions, the German command believed they had cornered the Americans. General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commander of the XL-7th Panzer Corps, decided to send an ultimatum to the U.S. commander in Bastogne. At midday, a party of German envoys under a white flag approached the American lines. Escorted through the checkpoints, they were brought to General Anthony McAuliffe's headquarters. The ultimatum letter, written in English, read in part, "The garrison at Bastogne has been completely encircled. If you surrender immediately, you will be treated humanely according to the Geneva Convention. If you refuse, overwhelming artillery and firepower will destroy Bastogne entirely. All responsibility for this disaster will rest with you." The message was clear: surrender and be spared, or face annihilation. To many freezing, exhausted American soldiers, it was a terrifying threat. But McAuliffe's reaction was unexpected. According to officers present, after reading the letter, McAuliffe laughed and exclaimed, "Aw, nuts!" At first, he considered not replying at all. But after discussion, it was agreed a formal answer was necessary. A brief note was drafted, just one word long: nuts. When the German envoys received the paper, they were puzzled. One asked, "We do not understand the meaning. Is this affirmative or negative?" Colonel Harry Kinnard, McAuliffe's chief of staff, explained, "It means you can go to hell." The reply, "nuts," spread quickly throughout Bastogne. In frozen bunkers and snowy trenches, American soldiers told each other how their commander had defied the entire German army with a single word. Morale, which had been sinking, suddenly blazed with new determination. To them, nuts was more than a phrase. It was a promise. Bastogne would never surrender. For the Germans, the failed ultimatum brought only fury. In the days that followed, the Wehrmacht launched heavy assaults to crush the American defense. Tiger II and Panther tanks, backed by infantry and artillery, stormed the perimeter again and again. But each attack was beaten back by the stubborn resistance of the 101st Airborne and the 10th Armored Division, who turned every snowy road and village into a fortress. Meanwhile, supplies inside the town reached breaking point. Artillery shells were nearly gone, fuel was scarce, and the wounded suffered without proper treatment. Soldiers wore captured German uniforms against the cold. Many survived only on candy bars or frozen K-rations. Still, they held out, driven by the belief that Patton was coming. To the south, General George S. Patton was indeed executing one of the fastest maneuvers in military history. In just 48 hours, he pivoted his entire Third Army, over 250,000 men, thousands of tanks, artillery, and trucks, from eastward operations to a northward advance toward Bastogne. Patton knew that with every passing day, the defenders were closer to collapse. His goal: break the siege before Bastogne fell. Through the final week of December, Bastogne became the hottest point on the entire Western Front. There, 18,000 Americans fought off more than 45,000 Germans in the worst weather, with supplies nearly gone. Yet thanks to the defiant nuts reply, their resolve only grew stronger. Bastogne was no longer just a small Belgian town. It was now a symbol of endurance and defiance. On December 23rd and 24th, the skies finally cleared, allowing the U.S. 8th and 9th Air Forces to fly. C-47 Dakotas braved enemy fire to drop hundreds of tons of ammunition, medicine, and food into the besieged town. The sound of engines overhead and the sight of supply crates falling into the snow gave the defenders new hope. Bastogne, though still surrounded, could now hold long enough for relief. Thus, nuts was not just a witty anecdote of war. It became a rallying cry, a flame that carried the Americans through their darkest days. And when Patton's Sherman tanks of the 4th Armored Division finally broke through on December 26th, they found a garrison exhausted but unbroken, men who had held the heart of the Ardennes with nothing more than courage, faith, and the spirit of a single word: nuts. While Bastogne lay buried under snowstorms, encircled and pounded by German fire, one of the boldest decisions of World War II was being made to the south of the Ardennes. The man behind it was General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army. Patton was already famous as a decisive, hot-tempered, yet brilliant commander. He believed that war left no room for hesitation, and that success came from speed and surprise. On December 19th, when Eisenhower and Bradley gathered at Luxembourg to discuss countermeasures against the German offensive, many officers estimated that it would take at least a week to realign their armies to relieve Bastogne. But Patton shocked them all by declaring, "I can pivot the entire Third Army from east to north within 48 hours and attack immediately." The claim sounded almost impossible. To achieve it, Patton would have to redeploy hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of Sherman tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery, trucks, and a vast logistical train. All of these forces had been massed along the Moselle front for an assault into the Saar. Now, he had to pull them back and swing them north toward Bastogne, a maneuver of unprecedented scale. Yet Patton accomplished it. Thanks to meticulous preparation and an extraordinarily efficient staff system, the Third Army began marching that very night. On frozen roads, endless convoys stretched for miles, moving without pause. Soldiers ate, slept, and even shaved in the back of trucks as they rolled forward. Military police erected makeshift road signs, some even using flashlights to guide columns through the night. Despite the blizzards, within 2 days Patton had shifted 3 divisions, the 26th Infantry, the 4th Armored, and the 80th Infantry, straight toward Bastogne. Meanwhile, the town continued to endure. On December 23rd and 24th, with skies clearing, U.S. aircraft finally managed to drop supplies, giving the defenders precious ammunition and medicine. But the Germans pressed tighter. Massive Tiger II and Panther tanks attacked surrounding villages, attempting to crush the perimeter. The Americans fought desperately, knowing that if the encirclement held just a few more days, Bastogne could fall. That was why Patton's speed became decisive. On December 24th, his spearheads reached the southern fringes of the Ardennes. That Christmas Eve, while the soldiers inside Bastogne celebrated with hard biscuits and thin coffee, Patton attended a church service in Luxembourg, praying for victory. Known for his fiery temper, he now showed a calm and unusual resolve. On the morning of December 25th, General Hugh Gaffey's 4th Armored Division began its push northward. They met fierce resistance from German panzer units. Battles raged through villages like Martelange, Bigonville, and Warnack. Sherman after Sherman was knocked out by Tiger fire, but the Americans pressed on. With superior numbers and relentless maneuver, they gradually forced the Germans back. Finally, on the afternoon of December 26, 1944, tanks of the 37th Tank Battalion, part of the 4th Armored Division, smashed through German lines and rolled into Bastogne via the village of Assenois. Shermans rumbled across the snow, American flags flying, as they entered the exhausted town. Soldiers poured into the streets, cheering wildly, many in tears. After nearly a week of isolation, Bastogne had been relieved. The relief of Bastogne was one of the crowning achievements of Patton's generalship. In less than 72 hours, he had turned an entire army and launched a precise counterstroke. His action not only saved 18,000 Americans in Bastogne, but also shattered Hitler's hopes of a decisive victory in the Ardennes. From that point, the battle's momentum shifted. Bastogne was no longer a vulnerable prize, but a thorn in the German advance, halting their drive toward the Meuse. The Wehrmacht, already crippled by fuel shortages and mounting losses, became bogged down in the Ardennes, unable to maintain its early advantage. The relief also bolstered Allied morale. If McAuliffe's defiant reply of "nuts" embodied American grit in the face of despair, Patton's lightning maneuver demonstrated the overwhelming organizational and logistical power of the Allies. Together, they turned Bastogne into a decisive turning point, after which Hitler's victory in the Ardennes was no longer possible. When the first Shermans of the U.S. 4th Armored Division rolled into Bastogne on the afternoon of December 26, 1944, the cheers and tears of American soldiers said it all. After a week of encirclement, bitter fighting in the freezing cold, and dwindling supplies of ammunition and medicine, they had finally been rescued. Bastogne still stood, and with it, the honor of the U.S. Army. Yet the opening into Bastogne did not mean the German encirclement was fully broken. In the days that followed, fierce fighting raged around the town. German panzer and infantry units tried desperately to counterattack and restore the siege. But by then, the initiative had shifted decisively to the Allies. The Americans defended the town while steadily widening the supply corridor, turning Bastogne into a fortified base that blocked every thrust toward the Meuse River. Meanwhile, Hitler's plan was unraveling in plain sight. The German army was already critically short of fuel. Many Tiger II tanks had to be abandoned on the roads simply because there was no gasoline. Reserves were insufficient to make up for mounting losses, and morale crumbled as U.S. resistance stiffened. Most importantly, beginning December 23rd, once the skies cleared, Allied air power returned in force. Thousands of sorties by P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, and B-26 Marauders severed German supply lines, leaving burning Wehrmacht convoys littered along Ardennes forest roads. After relieving Bastogne, Patton pressed forward with his Third Army, coordinating with Bradley's First Army advancing from the north, gradually closing a pincer around the Germans. In late December and early January, bloody battles erupted at Houffalize, Marvy, and along the Orthe River. The Wehrmacht, once hoping to break through to Antwerp, was now fighting simply to retreat before being encircled and annihilated. Strategically, the failure at Bastogne was decisive. It proved that Hitler's gamble, a desperate attempt to split the Anglo-American alliance and force negotiations, had collapsed completely. Bastogne became the steel hinge that broke the backbone of the Ardennes Offensive. After December 26th, the Germans never advanced farther. Instead, they were driven back by relentless Allied counterattacks. For the Americans, Bastogne was more than a military victory. It was a moral triumph. General McAuliffe's defiant "nuts" and the steadfast courage of the 101st Airborne became legend. Newspapers across the world spread the story, and it quickly became a symbol of American resilience. At the same time, Patton's miraculous maneuver was hailed as one of the greatest feats of operational command in modern military history. By mid-January 1945, German forces were forced to retreat to their original lines, leaving behind tens of thousands of casualties and vast quantities of destroyed tanks, artillery, and vehicles. The Battle of the Ardennes ended in catastrophic defeat for the Wehrmacht. In the long run, it was the last great German offensive on the Western Front. After this failure, Germany no longer had the strength to launch any strategic attacks. Just 4 months later, the Red Army stormed into Berlin, and Hitler took his own life. Bastogne, once an obscure Belgian town, entered history as one of the enduring symbols of World War II. It proved that sometimes the grit of frontline soldiers and the brilliance of commanders could alter the course of an entire war. The victory at Bastogne not only closed a heroic chapter of the Battle of the Ardennes, but also left behind a profound military and spiritual legacy that extended far beyond those freezing days of late 1944. First, from a military standpoint, Bastogne demonstrated the combined strength of the Allies. The battle was not the triumph of a single unit, but the result of seamless coordination among many forces, the steadfast stand of the 101st Airborne inside the encirclement, the infantry and armored divisions fighting desperately around the town to keep supply routes open, the timely bombing runs and airdrops by the U.S. Air Force, and, finally, the lightning maneuver of Patton's Third Army delivering the decisive blow. Each link in the chain mattered, and together they became a vivid testament to modern warfare, where victory depends on collective power rather than individual heroics. Bastogne also marked the irreversible decline of the Wehrmacht. After this failure, Germany lost much of its last strategic reserve on the Western Front. No longer able to mount large-scale offensives, the German army was reduced to fighting defensively until the fall of Berlin. In that sense, Bastogne was a death sentence written in advance for the Third Reich. Yet the legacy of Bastogne was not confined to the battlefield. It became a symbol of unyielding willpower and indomitable spirit. General McAuliffe's short, almost humorous reply, "Nuts," became an immortal declaration. It proved that even in what seemed the darkest and most hopeless of circumstances, morale and faith could keep an army from collapsing. The image of 101st Airborne Paratroopers, hungry, cold, ill-equipped, still holding every road and village in the snowstorm, stands as a clear testament to human resilience when confronted with a fight for survival. Psychologically, Bastogne was a powerful tonic for the Allies. After the initial shock of the German Ardennes Offensive, some soldiers and commanders feared a second Dunkirk might occur. But Bastogne rekindled confidence. It showed that American troops, though less experienced than their German counterparts, could stand toe-to-toe with the most elite panzer divisions. That resilience helped cement the belief that final victory was no longer a distant dream, but an approaching reality. For the Belgian people, Bastogne became a scar etched into collective memory. The small town endured bombardment, fire, and destruction from both sides. Yet it was also there that they witnessed the sacrifice and bravery of young soldiers from across the Atlantic. After the war, Bastogne was rebuilt and turned into a place of pilgrimage, where millions of Americans, Europeans, and visitors from around the world have come to honor the fallen. Monuments, museums, and military cemeteries rose to ensure that the memory of the battle would never fade with time. In art and popular culture, Bastogne has been immortalized in films, books, and documentaries. The most notable is the Bastogne episode of Band of Brothers, which vividly portrayed the ordeal of the 101st Airborne during those harrowing days. Such works do more than preserve history. They etch Bastogne into the public imagination as an enduring emblem of courage. The battle also left behind crucial lessons for military thought, studied in academies worldwide. It proved the value of rapid maneuver. Patton's pivot of an entire army in 48 hours wrote a new chapter in the art of operational warfare. It underscored the decisive role of logistics and air power. Without C-47 Dakota airdrops or the dominance of P-47s and P-51s in the skies, Bastogne might well have fallen. And finally, it reminded every commander that the spirit of soldiers is as vital as weapons. Today, when World War II is remembered, Bastogne often stands alongside Normandy and Stalingrad as a symbol of ferocity and a turning point in history. It proves that sometimes a small town in the woods can become the fulcrum on which global events pivot. The Battle of Bastogne ended in Allied victory, but its legacy endures for generations. It is a story of war, strategy, and firepower, but above all, it is a story of people. Young soldiers, in the most perilous moment of their lives, chose to stand firm rather than fall. And that choice, made in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, helped determine the fate of Europe.